Hello, Professor and classmates. My name is Alexis Menendez, and I will be participating in Debate 1 and taking Side B. I will be arguing that the United States should not intervene militarily to protect human rights because military intervention cannot produce positive results. Military intervention by the United States has been occurring for over 2 centuries now, starting from before the War of Independence all the way up until the War on Terrorism and our current involvement in Syria. To say the least, these involvements over time by the United States military have produced far from positive results. Military intervention produces negative results both for the United States and for the countries we attempt to help. The United States should not intervene militarily to protect human rights because this intervention does not always come from a place that holds altruistic motives to begin with, because military intervention is expensive, and because, most importantly, military intervention by the United States further destabilizes the countries we attempt to aid. Many people have this idea that the United States acts as somewhat of a peacekeeper, and that as a country we're extremely committed to humanitarian ideals. But unfortunately, this is not always the case. Take World War II, for example. Although the war began with Nazi Germany's attack on Poland in September of 1939, the United States did not enter the war until after the Japanese bombed the American fleet in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7, 1941. So why did it take the United States 3 years to intervene when we had knowledge of the atrocities occurring to innocent people in Poland? Up until the attack on Pearl Harbor, which basically forced us to become involved in the war, we viewed Nazi Germany's attack on Poland as another European affair that we did not want any part in. Basically, we viewed it as, it's not our problem. So it took someone, in this case the Japanese, directly attacking the United States for us to become involved in a war that threatened basic human rights. Which furthermore supports my argument that military intervention does not always come from a selfless place. In my opinion, if the United States is not going to go into a country solely with altruistic motives and solely to protect human rights, we should not be going into these countries in the first place. Not only did over 60 million people die during World War II and cost the United States $4 trillion in current currency, but it sparked the beginning of the Cold War, a conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union that dragged on for nearly half of a century. Moving on to the war against terrorism and the conflicts of the Middle East, again, another war in which we got involved into not solely for humanitarian reasons. Our involvement in the Middle East had little to do with the totalitarian rulers who had used coercion, genocide, and imprisonment to maintain what looked like stability in the Middle East for decades, but because our oil stability eventually became threatened, and after the United States became a victim to an extremely violent terrorist attack. After 9/11, the administration surrounding George W. Bush decided to kill Saddam Hussein and to erect a constitutional democracy in the loose confederation of Kurds, Shia, and Sunni that was Iraq. Military success was followed by a total civilizational collapse that continues to spread throughout the region today. And the United States failed to understand that this Western idea of constitutional democracy, which had worked so spectacularly in Europe after the war, was largely foreign to the civilization that we were introducing it to now, the Islamic Middle East. Many will argue that you cannot put a price on fighting to protect human rights. But what about the price that we pay as a nation that does not include money? In addition to the $1.7 trillion that the Iraq War cost the United States, 200,000 Iraqis, mostly of which were civilians, were killed. Furthermore, 1.7 million more Iraqi civilians died due to the sanctions regime, half of whom were children. And 4,491 United States service members were killed between 2003 and the year 2014. 20% of the veterans that did live suffered from PTSD. If the United States were to take a step down from the international stage that we are currently on, it would not be the United Nations that would fill that void, but eventually Russia and China. I believe that this concept is a large part of why we remain involved in countries, not to protect human rights, but to remain more prevalent in international affairs than our Russian and Chinese counterparts. Although the United States should not intervene militarily to protect human rights, because military intervention has proven that it cannot produce positive results time and time again, these problems should not go ignored. More relief-based operations and diplomatic interventions should be primarily looked at, and it should be done earlier and more effectively. If we do intervene militarily in these foreign countries, military forces should strive for neutrality, in contrast to what we have been doing. And finally, we must accept the fact that intervention cannot solve humanitarian or conflict resolution problems, but can merely alter them. A quote from Leon Panetta, the United States former Defense Secretary, stated that people who urge military action have to understand that before you take that step, you'd better understand where this kind of action leads. Thank you.